He noticed it before he noticed anything else. Not the faces, not the music, not the low murmur of conversations floating through the hotel lobby, but a scent, subtle at first, like a whispered question, weaving its way through the air toward him. It was warm, yet distant, familiar yet impossible to place. The kind of perfume that doesn't announce itself, but waits, patient, for the exact moment it needs to be remembered. He stopped walking without knowing why, his hand still on the handle of his worn briefcase, as if something unseen had just reached out and gently pulled him back. For most of his life, he had trusted only what could be measured. Deadlines, contracts, hours billed and hours lost. He had built a quiet existence inside spreadsheets and muted office corridors, a life efficient but weightless, where days slid past each other without edges. He was not a man who believed in signs, or in the language of instinct. Yet that night, as the city lights bled into the glass facade of the hotel, that perfume wrapped around him like a memory he did not own. It seemed to pause time for a fraction of a second, dividing his life, imperceptibly, into a before and an after. He tried to ignore it. He checked his phone, scanned the lobby for the business meeting he was already late for, and blamed his distraction on fatigue. But the scent followed him. It floated near the elevator doors, lingered by the reception desk, vanished for a moment, then returned with new intensity as someone walked past behind him. He didn't see the person's face, only the outline of a dark coat, the suggestion of long hair, the glint of a bracelet catching the dim light. The perfume felt like a presence, like being watched by something not hostile, but intent. He told himself it was just a luxury fragrance, typical of places like this, designed to impress. But this one felt different. It carried a weight he couldn't define, a quiet gravity that pulled old, buried sensations to the surface. The smell reminded him of late evenings in his childhood, of his mother getting ready for night shifts, of a hug that always lasted 1 second too short. It reminded him of a stranger he had once sat beside on a train years ago, whose perfume stayed with him long after the journey ended. It reminded him of all the times he had walked away from something without understanding why it mattered. The meeting, on the 23rd floor, started without him. While his colleagues argued numbers and negotiated terms, he sat at the edge of the group, his attention drifting every time the elevator chimed outside the glass walls of the conference room. Each distant footstep in the hallway felt connected to that invisible trail of scent. At one point, the perfume slipped into the room itself, so faint he wondered if he was imagining it. It curled around the corners of his awareness just as his name was called, just as the contract was pushed across the table toward him. "Sign here," they said. "It will change your career." His hand hovered over the paper. The numbers were right. The opportunity was enormous. It was the kind of deal he had always believed he wanted, proof that his long hours and quiet sacrifices had meant something. But as he lowered the pen, the perfume grew stronger again, as if the ghost of it were standing directly behind him, breathing gently over his shoulder. In that intangible presence, something inside him tightened not in fear, but in recognition. A sudden thought surfaced, uninvited and clear. This path will cost you something you cannot yet name. He signed anyway. The weeks that followed moved quickly. The promotion came. The income increased. The expectations doubled. His life, from the outside, looked like a perfect, linear ascent. Yet the perfume did not leave him. It appeared in the most unlikely places. In the elevator of his new office building late at night, in a crowded underground parking lot, drifting from a stranger crossing the street on a rainy evening. Each time, the scent arrived like a silent reminder that there was something unfinished trailing behind him, something his new title and higher salary had failed to quiet. One night, after a particularly long day, he found himself in the hotel again, the same hotel where he had first noticed the perfume. The company had booked a formal dinner to celebrate yet another deal, the kind of evening built around crystal glasses, polite laughter, and carefully curated appearances. He wore an expensive suit that didn't feel like his, smiled at conversations that blurred together, and tried not to think about how tired his eyes looked in the restroom mirror. As he stepped back into the dimly lit hallway, he smelled it again. This time, the perfume was undeniable, immediate, like walking into a memory made solid. It came from just ahead, where the corridor turned toward a quieter lounge area. He followed it almost without choice. At the corner, he saw a figure standing near the large window overlooking the city, a silhouette outlined by the glow of distant lights. The person's back was turned to him, their posture relaxed, yet somehow heavy. A bottle of perfume sat on the ledge beside them, its glass catching the golden reflections from the street far below. He stopped several steps away. He could have turned around. He could have gone back to the dinner, to the safety of hollow speeches and predictable outcomes. Instead, he spoke, a simple question, his voice low, directed more to the air than to the stranger. "What perfume is that?" The figure turned slightly. Not enough for him to see their full face, just enough for him to notice tired eyes and a small, almost absent smile. The answer they gave was not the name of a brand, but a story. It had been a gift, they said, from someone who was no longer in their life. They wore it on nights when they felt lost, when they needed to remember that choices could be undone, that paths could be left, that not everything locked us in forever. The scent, for them, was a private ritual, a way to test whether they still recognized themselves in the reflection on the glass. Tonight, they admitted, they had considered not coming at all. The party inside felt like a performance they were no longer sure they wanted to be a part of. Listened. Something shifted inside him. The perfume, once abstract and haunting, now carried a story that mirrored his own in quiet, unsettling ways. Two strangers, standing side by side in front of the city they were supposed to be conquering, silently admitting to themselves that they felt like they were disappearing within it. He realized he had not made a real decision in years. He had followed expectations, accepted promotions, and signed contracts, all under the illusion that he was in control, while something unseen guided him through inertia and fear. They talked for a long time, about work, about exhaustion, about the strange loneliness of success that doesn't feel like success. The perfume floated between them, a soft, constant reminder of the thin line between staying and leaving. At one point, the stranger asked him, almost casually, what he would do if he were not afraid of losing everything he had built. The question cut through him more sharply than any criticism he had ever received. He did not have an answer. Not then, but the question stayed. In the following days, that question echoed more loudly than the praise he received at the office. While emails poured in and meetings stacked on his calendar, a new awareness had taken root. The scent appeared less often now, as if it had completed the part of its journey that required his attention. In its absence, he began to notice other things. How early he arrived at the office, and how late he left. How distant he felt from friends he once considered close. How his happiest moments were no longer tied to his achievements, but to small, unremarkable pauses in his routine. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to make different choices. He declined a promotion that would have tied him even more tightly to the life he no longer recognized. He took time off he had been postponing for years. He reconnected with his sister and found that their conversations brought him more peace than any closed deal. He enrolled in an evening course unrelated to his career, something he had always been curious about, but never allowed himself to pursue. Each step felt like walking against a current he had once mistaken for destiny. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, he passed by a small boutique he had never noticed before. The display in the window was simple. A single perfume bottle, illuminated by a narrow beam of light, resting on dark velvet. Something about the glass, about the way it seemed to hold a secret, caught his attention. He stepped inside. The shop was empty except for the soft music playing in the background. He didn't ask for a recommendation. He didn't search for familiar names. Instead, he pointed to the bottle from the window. The shopkeeper sprayed it onto a small strip of paper and handed it to him. As he lifted it to his face, the scent blossomed different from the one in the hotel, yet carrying the same strange duality of comfort and unease. In that moment, he understood. It wasn't about recreating a specific perfume, not about chasing the exact smell that had once haunted him. It was about acknowledging that something invisible had woken him up from a life he had been sleepwalking through. He bought the bottle. From then on, he wore the perfume on days when he needed to remember that his life was no longer guided by autopilot. It became his own quiet ritual, a reminder that destiny was not a straight line, but a series of small, almost imperceptible choices. Years later, if someone would ask him when everything changed, he wouldn't mention a specific promotion, or a crisis, or a visible turning point. He would remember a night in a crowded lobby, a strange perfume cutting through the noise, and an invisible thread that pulled him away from a version of himself he was no longer meant to be. He never met that person again. Their paths diverged as quietly as they had converged. Yet the impact remained, carried through the air like a trace of fragrance that lingers long after the wearer has left the room. The perfume itself could not be seen, could not be held, could not be captured, but it had done what few visible things in his life had managed to do. It had changed his direction, and in the silence of his new, chosen life, he finally understood that sometimes what alters our destiny the most is not what stands before our eyes, but what moves, unseen, just beyond them. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to follow for more.